Hello all. Welcome to part one, or part A, of my recap series of Under a Black Cross, a Dark Ages vampire chronicle that I have been running with a group of friends for the past few months now. We've been doing this, we've gotten up until about midpoint, and I've decided I need to start doing this series because I promised myself I would, and I do not want to forget all the events that have transpired in the game thus far and wait for this at a later point. I would like to get this done and posted to my channel with post haste, as it were. I have already done a prologue that has introduced some of the characters, the setting I've created for my world of darkness, and few other details that you were going into this of the very strange variant of the World of Darkness setting that I use. That further, I have done that enough in the prologue. Just if you're wondering, go look that up on my channel. If you've already watched it, great. Let's continue here. Now, our game is set in the year 1207 AD, the year of our Lord, in the town of Magdeburg, Germany, or Magdeburg. I do not know how to pronounce that exactly myself, but pronunciation aside, the players have been invited to the courts of Jurgen von Verden, child of Hardestat the Elder and sword-bearer of the fiefdoms of the Black Cross, a very, very well-known Ventru who has a lot of holdings in the area. Before I get further into the vampiric and Cainite history of this session, I will let you know a small tad of the mortal history from my knowledge. I am not a scholar of Germanic and Polish history, which comes in much later. I have mainly been doing this as a bit of just an exercise for my role-playing. I've mainly been focusing on characters and not really the overarching story. Players have been manipulating history itself, changing many things in the process. And so, again, please just note that if you are a history buff of any sort or an academic, you may not find what I have done with this setting completely kosher, as it were. Either way, from what I can understand about the history of this takes place just before the crusade into Poland, or the crusades were going on at this time, but many of the Teutons had not actually made their way into Poland at this point. They were mainly sticking back in Germany, waiting for official representation by the king. I believe King, the king's name is actually, I am sorry, it is escaping me. I do not have a list or anything that I am reading from currently, so I will simply continue forth. Yes, it was King Andreas II of Hungary. He was being, at this time, beset by unruly barons at home, and he feared that his borders were open to attack from the pagan Cumans, and so to protect his kingdom, he called upon the Teutonic Order, offering them Transylvanian holdings to keep the frontiers safe. This long-awaited opportunity for Lord Jurgen to move those knights under his sway against the Chemise lords, claiming Chemise lands in Eastern Europe. He wanted those territories for his own. Now, the problem with this, of course, was he was going to be needing much support from his Cainite subordinates, as it were. Vladimir Rustovich, for example, is his main goal, to march against Rustovich, to bring down this great fiend leader. He has hated him for so many years now, and Lord Jurgen has called upon many different Cainites to come to his holdings in Magdeburg, come to a grand feast, a feast of friendship. I want alliances. I need support from my Cainite brethren. I need to show them I am their lord, and I will be the hammer of the Shemisei. And so he did this, sent out many invitations to many different Cainites across the land, many from his own city, but specifically also from many down the lands near Prague, where two of our player characters, Norbert Kroll, the Cappadocian, and Fish, made their haven. Well, Fish more or less made his haven on the Elf in the Elbe River instead of the actual city, but there. He sent these letters to them because he is known they have some status among their kind. Fish was a competent spy master for his adoptive sire, Bernhard the Bare-Blooded of Clan Ventru, the adoptive sire who saved him after his embrace. And there was also the Norbert Kroll, the Cappadocian of the Petrin Hill Monastery, not a Catholic man himself, nor a member of the Cainite heresy. He's a Jewish individual, child of Gervais. He's also brother of Garanal of Petrin Hill Monastery, afforded him a great deal of status, a natural philosopher of sorts. Finally, however, the third Cainite who was invited to these processions was Arthur Plotza of Leipzig, a minor Templar knight of the Bruja clan. Fought in Constantinople, owned a few minor lands around Leipzig. He invited these three Cainites to come up the Elbe and come to the feast, and so, of course, they said yes. This is a great lord. We need to talk to someone like this. This man, who knows what he could provide to us. As we all know, I mean, at this point in time, what is truly the Prince of Prague going to be offering any of us, as they all thought to themselves? Either way, all of the Cainites left their holdings. Arthur left his lands instead of several of his some of his loyal retainers, human retainers, not ghouls, and headed up the Elbe with his squire, a boy by the name of Alistair, who does a bit. Who, interestingly enough, Alistair is his human son from back when before he was embraced. He has kept this a very large secret for many years now. But he brought the boy along with him, along with his with Sir Exkengeschiet, which is his horse, a Gould horse, literally translates to Sir Eatface. Fish came up with his adoptive sire, Bernhard. Bernhard more on the path of humanity, more or less. If Crusade were to start, as the great Bernhard saw it, he needs to be there to keep many of the Teutons in line, to not basically to not cause too much of a body count. A very strange Ventru is Bernhard. We'll get more into him later, but Fish himself, Fish is a 50-year-old man trapped in a 12-year-old's body. So along the boat ride up, he was acting very childish, in his disguised as a leper. He would annoy and even scare many of the sailors, leaving dead rats in their beds, all that sort of thing. Norbert Kroll himself ferried himself on a very private ship, loaned to him by his brother in blood, Garanal, ready, available herd to feed from, but they, of course, had to be sent back when their mission had been accomplished of bringing him up the Elbe. All of the players, though, they arrived. They arrived in Magdeburg, and Magdeburg, they entered through of them. It was and normally still and very quiet, especially for a medieval city of this. Even cities like Prague, some of the stands would stay open at night. Nothing was open here. No mortals walked the streets at all. Were bolted, lights were dimmed or completely out, shutters were closed. the city appearance of one that had been abandoned by its citizens. Most houses made of stone, and the streets were paved and cobbled, while above them, from the towers and walls of the castle, flew black banners of the Teutonic Order. They had paid their dues to the boatmen, and continued throughout the city streets until they were accosted by a rider who began to slowly approach, raising his hand in salute as he did. And when he approached, they could see he was an especially he was a man who sat upon a horse, and he was dressed in the full Teutonic regalia. He had a beaked helm, chainmail, heraldry of the great Teutonic knights, and he dismounted and introduced himself. Gunther, his name was, and he said, "My to those, even to fish, the great Lord Jurgen sword-bearer, von Verden himself, and he was to bring them to Magdeburg Castle, and he took their invitations, and after they relayed their names, and Gunther accepted them, and they followed him as he led them to Magdeburg Castle. They did so and soon came to the impressive and newly constructed, heavily guarded fortifications. The castle was fully manned by knights of the Black Cross. Gunther led them through the gates and into the courtyard, where their steeds, well, the only steed they had was Arthur's, Essengeschicht. It was stabled, and Alistair, his human retainer, was left out in another area. Arthur pulled Gunther aside shortly after and explained to him that this is just a human vassal of mine. He's not to be harmed. Please just take him somewhere else. Do not have any of the Cainites feet from him. And Gunther immediately said, "Yes, of course. We're not savages here, sir. We're not savages." And they were led through a series of windowless suites that would serve as quarters to many Cainites who were granted into the castle. They were also given a few suites so they could wash and change before they were led down towards Jurgen Swordbearer's Grand Hall. A herald then escorted them down and announced them to the court. Several Cainite dignitaries were already present, taking and observing the company with interest. Ghouls and unreleased child are attending to those who dress in took his leave just after the heralds arrived, escorting other coteries and their representatives to the hall. And although the room was very dimly lit, the grand hall was a vast and open space. The indiscernible vaulted ceiling was well over 20 feet high, disappearing into a veil of shadows above. And 4 stone pillars, they sat on the edges of the hall, and an old painting and richly textured ventru banners adorned all along the sides, against the furthest of which was an elevated throne befitting the wealthiest of all sovereigns, with an intricate insignia carved into the seat itself. Behind it, a gargantuan ventru symbol hung upon the wall, subtly containing the mark of the Methuselah Hardestat, and a lush ruby blanket was draped over the chair, with a series of luxurious carpets of a similar hue to conceal that stone floor. And to the left of Jurgen's throne, there was a stage and a set of crimson curtains that concealed whatever lay behind it. And facing both the stage and Jurgen's seat was this regal table covered with gifts, dried floral arrangements, scrolls, and throughout the hall stood these Teutonic knights, clad in armored mail and helms, and they stood rigidly at attention, and no doubt awaiting their lord. And a woman stood behind stood behind and left of the throne. Equally, if not more impressive, this woman was very powerfully built, though with a lithe figure, dressed in fine, regal courtly dress of a deep blue hue, with her long hair plaited down her back. She was also, there was a sword that was slung at her side. The coterie themselves, Arthur specifically at this point, and Norbert Krull, and also Fish, none of them knew each other. They'd all gone off to do their own things, observing this room as it came to them. Arthur actually seemed to care very little for what was going on around him, because Jurgen was not here yet. Arthur wanted to meet Jurgen. Arthur was a man, he's on a road of chivalry. He respects Jurgen. They both are paladins of the road of chivalry. They both fight for the good Christian values of this land. So he just sat down, completely still covered in his Templar's armor. He was just sat down in a small chair away from this very large and boisterous crowd of Cainites. There were many strange Cainites that littered this group, actually. Many what appeared to be La Sombra dignitaries, a Nosferatu of some kind, completely wrapped head to toe in bandages like an Egyptian mummy would be. And there were so many others. There were tons of these strange things that were going on, but Arthur would have none of it. He just sat there, sitting down, waiting. And as he did this, though, whenever he made a movement, Fish decided to walk up to this great paladin, this great Templar, this crusader, just began mimicking every motion that Arthur did. And Arthur was getting very annoyed at this, but he wouldn't let his frenzy overcome him for a small child mocking him, or a child he thought it was. Norbert Krull, on the other hand, he was acting much differently at this point. He was getting involved with the people around him. He had a status to him. He was very well known from Prague. He had known among his clan, too. He was a known philosopher of the Germanic area. Some would call his full title Norbert Krull, the philosopher of Petrin Hill. Some who did not like him would mock him and call him the it's something along the lines of, as he heard it, though we did not hear it in complete detail, something like the Jew King writer, or something like that. He was a Jewish man. But he began getting involved, talking with a lot of these different dignitaries, these Cainites, and he also heard a few different rumors about some of the people in attendance here. One of these rumors he heard was about Jurgen's. I believe it was someone, he didn't remember who, but overheard them said he was the most dangerous warrior that the patricians have, and he fought in the Holy Land, crusade in the Fiend's Land. He also heard a small rumor about the Hungarian Ventru, and something about how I believe it was the Nosferatu who said this. He said he had heard that they had agreed to let Jurgen traipse around their domain, and Jurgen thinks he's going to cow them, but he'd better be very careful. The great Nova Airpaid may of course try to stop him from doing such a thing. At this point, though, suddenly, just completely suddenly, applause filled the room as Lord Jurgen entered. His presence was just so overwhelming, it even caused Arthur to stand from his seat. almost unknowingly, because he had been basically all of his attention had been focused on Fish, but just suddenly he stood up and started just clapping, just clapping and applauding. And then he finally realized why he was applauding. Jurgen was here. Why did I start clapping? I didn't even realize he'd entered the room, he thought to himself. But no doubt, Jurgen's presence is a very potent thing, it would seem. Jurgen was dressed very formally, but though not ostentatiously. The most distinguishable garment was his long and crimson cloak. He was a very well-built man with a square-cut face and short blonde hair, and an exuding aura of confidence and control. And following Jurgen was a woman of irreproachable beauty. The player of the Cainites, they all immediately recognized her. It was Rosamund of Islington, a pale figure of pure elegance, dressed as a queen, and a wife of a long train following in her wake. And she stood at Jurgen's right, and attendants brought out a high-backed seat for her to place next to his own. He raised his hands, and the chamber fell completely silent. And he looked upon everyone, and he simply gave a small speech, a very dignified speech, I would say, that he was just so happy that everyone here could just thanking them all for attending. He was very humble. Very humble. The Cainites of the party noted. Fish at this point cared little. It was Bernhard was the one who was more at this point just focused on him and just listening to everything he had to say. Jurgen then looked to Rosamund and thanked her for participating, and all eyes were on Rosamund at this point, and the chamber just erupted into applause yet again. Another Cainite possessed of a very sinister-looking beauty. It was one of Rosamund's male attendants. He held a velvetly deep blue case, and he moved behind Rosamund. And Jurgen and Rosamund, they took their seats. And the musicians, he makes his appearance on stage and begins to play a flute, creating a pleasant and melodious sound, and it filled the entire hall. After a bit more chatter and gossip, the players they didn't do much at this point, and I can understand why. Norbert Kroll had gotten most of the rumors he wanted to hear, and he didn't like what he was hearing at that point. He didn't like a lot of the contradictions. Of course, that's what you're going to get with rumors, but it just seemed very unfair, like that some of these people were also speaking of Jurgen in low ways, but then just kissing his ass like no other. Afterwards, though, after some more chatter and gossip, various envoys began to present themselves to Jurgen. Several Iberian Lasombra made their presentations. They offered Jurgen various historical tomes of great antiquity. He accepted them, of course, but it wasn't much that impressed him. Gervais, not to confuse him with the Gervais that Norbert Kroll is related to, this Gervais was of the clan Tremere, representing Serois. He was accompanied by two other warlocks, and they made their presentation, they offered a grand scepter of friendship. And the chamber surged slightly as they made their presentation, and envoys whispering of the treacherous Tremere, and they're only trying to forge this desperate alliance. And Norbert Kroll was overhearing all of this. At that point, though, he accepted this immediately. Right afterwards, however, there were a few other Cainites and Ventru lords who approached the throne, and then a troupe of performers dressed up like brightly colored jesters. They were a group of Ravnos, led by a Cainite named Silas, and a lone Malkavian there was also by the name of Calvin. They also approached, but at this point, basically, the Ravnos were setting up for some sort of show that they were going to be doing. The music was continuing to play in the room, and every and everyone in the room, they appeared to be eyeing everyone else. Indeed, several of the the company, the Cainites, they are players. They overheard people inquiring about them, like, who are these strangers? They are both mingling and overhearing more things about Jurgen at this point. One of the most interesting things they heard off of an Iberian Lasombra was that he was nothing more than this cat's paw for Lord Hardestat. Arthur, at that point, right when he heard that, he walked up to that Iberian Lasombra and just stared him down through his helmet and said, "You will not speak low of a king in his own court." Just stared him down, caring not at all about the Elysium that had been basically placed down upon this in this room at this point. Just and it really scared this this Iberian Lasombra. It cowed him, and Norbert at that point, like, he took note of that fear that this man brought into there. But the crowd's attention was waxing and waning with the various other presentations. At this point, however, the double doors at the back of the grand hall swung open, and the crowd snapped to attention as the contingent of chemise strode through the room. Tall and stunning and inhumanly beautiful, Lady Kara Vlasi strode forward towards Jurgen, flanked by two Vlasi revenant knights in armor. She just stood there, very regally dressed, very beautiful woman, very beautiful. She said, "I am Carla Vlasi Lopeski, child and envoy of Vladimir Rustovich, voivod of voivods, daughter of Isbath of Vlasi, child of Radu Bisatri. My lord asks that I convey his thanks for your invitation and recognizes your domain over this city and the surrounding hinterlands. Lord Jurgen's features by nothing, his thanks nothing more than a terse nod. The voivod does wonder of his are the claims of a petty warlord." At that point, another individual piped up. "If you cannot tell, I must wonder what your mother taught you. After all, I have heard that the whore of Bistries knew all the tricks to exact the secrets from our Arpade kin of Hungary. Regardless, I'm sure the truth will become clear soon enough." The coterie, their heads snapped over to see who this man was. It was the Baron von Aschren. The Baron von Aschren was, he is a child of Jurgen, very infamous individual in the area, it is said. Very, very, some say he is childish. There's a lot of different horrid rumors surrounding him, saying he was even at one point Nova Arpade's personal plaything, back when he was still immortal. But he spoke with dignity, and even making fun of, even in this very dangerous attempt at bringing low this the great Kara. And the attendees, they were just watching this exchange with forced stoicism, especially Rosamund and another man who was sort of standing in the back. Though some appeared to be enjoying this verbal dueling taking place, the woman standing next to Jurgen with a sword on her hip raised her hand to the hilt of her sword, and Kara's knights did so as well. And the Teutonic and knights around the chamber appeared to have moved into a state of readiness, including one group behind the company of players. Arthur, at this point, reached for a table knife and he was going to brandish this, and he looked like he was about ready to charge forward and attack the two revenants. But Jurgen broke the silence by calling for von Ascheren to continue. My lord, as you surely know, Andras, the mortal king of Hungary, is convinced that the pagan Cumans on his eastern border pose a threat to his realm, and in order to defend his lands, he has called upon the aid of the Order of the German Hospital of St. Mary. For myself, I bear with me letters from my lords, Bulsh Arpade and his vassals, Lady Nova Arpade and Prince Vencel of Buda and Pest, inviting you to claim domain in the region under the auspice of the hospital. They agree that you can and should stand against the fiends who infest these dark lands. Both to surprise and anger, they flashed briefly across Kara's face. Those lands are neither theirs to grant nor yours to claim, patrician. The founder made a covenant with the very earth there. No letter state a mortal catspaw can come before that. We shall see about that, whore's daughter. The Vlasi knights drew their swords, and Kara, she bared her terrible fangs at this insult that really hit close to home for her. And the hall did ring with steel for a short time. One of the knights behind the company flew into action, pushing Arthur, Norbert, and even Fish out of the way, trying to strike Lady Kara with his bare hands, but likewise, he was struck with lightning speed that sent him sprawling to the floor, though unharmed. Reining both herself and her knights in, Kara stormed out of the chamber without another word. Basically, the crowd parting for them as they left. The room was reeling from the standoff between von Ascheren and Lady Kara. Lady Rosamund of Islington rose from her seats, and throughout the ceremony, she has offered nothing more than the slight curve of her lips. Yet she stood there, the eyes and every ear of the Cainites in the room, on her as she requested silence, and her aide moved beside her, opening up the precious case that he held, revealing a shining gilded sword. She just looked upon Jurgen and said, I come to offer you a great symbol in favor of the courts of love. And she poetically described the crafting of this sword. Each gem she claimed to be the finest among their kind, while the metals of pristine quality was forged by Europe's finest smiths. Rosamund raised this shining broadsword inlaid with precious gems and covered with decorative crests, and Jurgen thanked Rosamund for her gift and faced the guest. I am heartened that so many have graced Magdeburg. With their presence this night, I greet the kind words of our Hungarian kin, and our artisan peers with equal cheer. Baron von Ascheren, Lady Rosamund, you have this night given me the tools with which to right many wrongs. I have set my court upon the river Elbe for a reason. For too long, the eastern marches have been held wild and untamed, ruled by a collection of depraved lords of the Chemise fiends, and other forces darker still. Our clanmates and allies in Hungary, Bohemia, Bavaria, they have suffered at the hands of these beasts for too long. The fiends' twisted legions have plagued just every plan to defend our domains against Saracen and pagan. Even raiding into Zara during the Crusade of 1202. It is time for this to end. Raising his sword up into the air that he received, We can no longer stand idly by and wait for the next inevitable assault. With a cord of the noble Arpades, my vassals undertake the construction of strongholds in Kronstadt and Transylvania. As well, I am planning soon a great expedition into the lands of Poland to secure alliances among Polish Cainites to weaken Vladimir Rustovich's hold in that area of Eastern Europe, possibly even turn his own voivods against him. In 2 years' time, we will be sailing for the great city of Gdansk. I apologize, not 2 years' time, in several months' time. I am sorry for that, ladies and gentlemen. Wrote that down wrong. The domains that we shall claim shall serve as a bulwark against the aggression of the Chemise, and I pledge myself and my sword to defending it. For a solid minute, there was great applause, especially from the characters. They were just reeling with applause at this point. Except for one. Fish, at this point, during that giant scuffle, snuck out of the main courtroom and has been exploring the larger castle, it turns out. So while the other two Cainites in the party were Arthur and Norbert were sitting in the grand hall, and I apologize, I'm getting a little bit tired, it would seem. While they were sitting in the grand hall and they were listening to a great chorus, many dignitaries were breaking into discussion since a war had just been declared. Fish was just walking around the very large halls, and through some very good dice rolling, he realized after looking out a window that he saw several figures were approaching the castle from outside. It was very hard to see them. I believe, is it? No, he does not have protein. Fish actually does manifest a very strange discipline, a fourth discipline, a very rarity amongst vampires, but for some reason he has developed a natural serpentis. His own sire has tried to keep this a secret from many other vampires, because such a thing is it is a very strange, very perverse that all of a sudden a Nosferatu, why would it be manifesting the powers of a Setite even? For what reason would that be? And but he could not see, sadly, in the pitch darkness. Serpentis does not allow that as protein, of course. But he saw these figures approaching, and he began rushing back towards the throne room and entered inside of it. They were approaching the side of the Grand Court, so he was trying to run up through the crowd, trying to get up to Lord Jurgen to warn him about what's going on. But of course, he's a child. Like no one cares. The Teutonic Knights are getting in the way. Several other Cainites are getting in the way. By the time he got up there, there was suddenly a thunderous clash. A gust of wind blew the stage curtains aside, and the musicians stumbled backwards onto the stone floor, and the crowd fell silent as three towering figures emerged from the crimson curtains, dressed completely in furs. The central figure was a woman that stood at a considerably taller than the others, and all three, they were very particularly imposing. The most terrifying part about these three, they looked like wolfmen. They looked like the lupines of the wild. They looked like monsters. They were gigantic with large claws. They didn't exactly have that full war form, but it was that close look to them. Ferocious creatures. But reacting with lightning speed, a ghoul knight of the Teutonic Order leapt onto the stage, brandishing a broadsword in a vast sweeping arc, but the intruders were faster still. Two of them moved forward, swiping at and savaging the knight. The brash Teuton, his head cleft from his shoulders. It rolled straight onto the floor, and blood splat everywhere. And a particularly hungry looking vampire in the back ran up, and he grabbed the head and like scurried it off into the darkness, much to the chagrin of his fellows. Arthur was about ready to grab a large stool and just rush forward, charging at these creatures. They looked like lupines. They had attacked, but his frenzy was quelled by Jurgen's presence. Lord Jurgen, the one woman standing next to him in the bluish dress, sword in hand, Lord Jurgen raised his hand in restraint. He rose from his throne without even making a sound. His presence was so powerful it radiated his authority. How dare you disrupt this ceremony? Turned to him, almost ready to pounce, but the woman stopped. Who are you, creature? I am Maro, child of Arnulf. You are Jurgen, child of Hardestat. And this feast is a mockery. I know that you sent a force of your knights into Hungary. And that land there, it's only Rustovich's because he pays tribute to me. I am here with a warning. I am not going to kill you, patrician, though I would see your head mounted on my hut's walls. You do not tread on gangrel lands. Any of you tread on gangrel lands, I bring a war to your lands. Norbert Krull was at this point hiding under a he was hiding under a table, but with his notes out, like poking his head up, just writing all this down as it went on, just watching and writing and everything he could, getting all of this information down. One of the gangrel kind of sniffed and just looked straight at him, growling. He did not hide. He just kept writing it down, like, yes, good, more, yes, I want, keep talking, keep talking. After giving this warning, Maro and the rest of her gangrel companions, they left as they arrived, like a gust of raging wind. People were just, all the Cainites in the room were just taken aback by this. Arthur was still holding the stool in his hand, ready to charge, and he just dropped it on the ground. At this point, the entire room was just in a frantic. That the head of the Teuton was wrenched from the hands of the very petty Cappadocian who grabbed it. Not Norbert, a different Cappadocian. Jurgen called then for his entertainers. We need to get away from this. And at that point, the first artist was a Malkavian, Calvin, who I mentioned earlier. And he, to try to calm everyone's nerves, he skillfully interpreted a series of poems, some of his own, and devising hidden meanings to them. Though I did have the players roll me perception enigmas, but none of them could discern what these meant. Calvin is said to be of one of the enigma cults of Malkavians, a very strange cultural groups that they have within them that are all about discerning and creating new forms of puzzles. The Cassandras are always very strange. But then, Fish was amazed by the next performance that came. Many people were amazed and horrified by this. The Ravnos performance. Acrobats and jugglers. They had impressive skill. Silas and his two brothers. They were flinging and passing sharp daggers to each other with very impressive speed, and all the more so when the daggers burst into flames as they were performing. The crowd were backing away in fear of that the Rotschreck may rear its ugly head at this display. And upon finishing, all the performers bowed before Jurgen and kissed his blade in a clearly rehearsed fashion before the crowd before the crowd. And it then continued at this point to where the Tremere stage to present themselves with a very interesting display, a ritual that Gervais knew, that he could, like the spirit's touch, but he could discern every thing about any item. Very similar to the spirit's touch, yes, but I believe, but there was a catch to it that not many people. Oh, I'm very sorry. It's the ritual Whispers of the Truth, as he called it. It's he basically explained they reworked the power of Spirit's touch, used to divulge precious information, but they also find the secrets of manufacture. It's the easiest to reveal, since they involve the object themselves, and they were asking everyone, please come forth and anyone, we can tell you where an item of yours came from. Arthur approached them with a very interesting item. He called for it, actually. No Cainites in the room, aside for those working directly for Jurgen, were allowed to have weapons. Arthur had to check his mace at the door, a weapon he called the heretic stick. He beat pagans to death with this thing. So he was given the mace, and he handed it over to Gervais and asked, determine where this is from, Warlock. He doesn't, and so he took it, and he relayed it back to him. You had this made in Constantinople. No, not Constantinople, near Constantinople. You made it specifically to bring it down upon the heads of the heathens who mocked your Christian faith. Arthur looked at this, and he was completely right. That is completely right in every single way. Jurgen, at that point, intrigued, brought his sword before, the one that Rosamund had gifted to him. And he picked it up, and he also did it, and he looked upon it, and Gervais said, the gems, they're imitations, my lord. So is the blade. It's not being made of no more precious materials than a common soldier's blade. A forgery of remarkable skill, I must say. After Jurgen took the blade back, and he just stared down at Rosamund, and he swung his blade high into the air and brought it down upon the stone floor. And he raised it, and it was obviously dented and showed the blemish to the Toreador. Weak forging and false stones. Rosamund said nothing, but she was completely, but her embarrassment and anger stirred her beast. She retains control, and she looked upon them. Our observers, they noticed that she bared her fangs for a slight moment, and there was blood sweat on her brow, and Arthur overheard someone say, "Usurper trickery." Arthur just turned to that man and looked him down and said, "Do you see my mace, sir? You know what I had this made for? Specifically to bring it down upon the heads of heretics. I have told no man that story. I trust the sorcerer. I trust good Gervais here. He is not lying. He is completely truthful. Well, then you must have had some sort of paying you to say such a thing. He is not paying me. Are you questioning the word of your superior? Then I will take you outside and show you the error of your ways with my mace. No, no, no. I apologize for the slight, sir. You're damn well sure you should be apologizing. I apologize, Gervais, for for how they mistrust you. It is no problem, Arthur. I understand these problems. And now, Jurgen calls for music to resume, as if possibly to distract the baited crowd from the salvage of a soiled celebration. Jurgen and Rosamund, they were prepared to move behind the curtains with the sword, and Gervais approached them, and after a few words, the magus and one of his attendants, they headed behind the curtain with Jurgen and Rosamund. Basically, at this point, Arthur was also called over, and he found that they were there was a chance at defending themselves from accusations of treachery, and Arthur was asked to come because he defended Gervais. The other players were able to actually overhear the conversation as well, and while the actors of a drama moved from the stage from a distant corner, envoys also heard Norbert overheard Calvin the Malkavian offer his opinion. A counterfeit sword for a counterfeit alliance, he asked, posing this question to a dumbfounded audience. And everyone stood rooted in the floor, awaiting Jurgen's return. And at this point, the first session had ended. Again, I'm very much unscripted here. I'm sorry if I don't do this in any specific way, or if my camera quality isn't the greatest. But I hope that it kind of gives you a good introduction into the story we have been in the process of creating and what I've been using. This is all pre-written adventure parts. Later on, as I get deeper and deeper into this, we will get into the middle portion where I completely improv'd it and wrote it myself. And and I'm still doing that. It's very fun to write, actually. Anyways, my throat is very dry at this point. I am going to sign off now. Have a good evening to one and to all, and we will see how our players are, what they just are getting involved in at this point, through this feast.